How do you survive a toxic job? We're going over the stages of grief in relation to a toxic job, and how you survive is going through a healing process. So, I've mentioned the other videos that healing, you know, takes a while. It's not just something that just happens once you decide to leave a toxic job or once you leave. It's a process. And so, part of the process of healing deals with going through the grief process about a toxic job. And sometimes we might think, why am I grieving about a toxic job? There might be many reasons why you grieve, right? I talked about those in the previous video. But I do want to say that healing is possible. That's why I'm having these conversations. I'm having these conversations. And again, being very transparent. I've talked about a number of issues over the past year about Black women healing from toxic jobs. I've had different Black women coming on talking about it. And I've shared bits and pieces about my own healing journey, but I thought it would be important for me to share more of that in terms of why am I even having these conversations? Because I've been there. I know what it's like. It's horrible. It's a form of trauma. Anne Marie Archer talks about the healing process is ongoing. And I would say to any Black woman, if you're in a toxic job, I want you to know that, you do have options and that I wouldn't recommend anybody just immediately leaving their job if there's no backup, right? Unless they are an immediate harm, right? So physically, emotionally, spiritually, there's harm, right? I would say that might be something that you want to look at more immediately. But if it's something that you recognize that you are being harmed in some way, or you're not growing, you're not being respected, you're not being affirmed, generally it's a process. So it took me at least 3 years to leave my toxic job. Thank God I did. But I want to talk to you about the healing journey, and I want to share with you in terms of my own experiences through the grief process. So I've already gone over denial, I've gone over anger, and I've gone over bargaining. So depression is the fourth stage of grief. Okay. So again, the stages of grief can go kind of back and forth. And my grieving kind of took place as I was at the job and then after I left the job, right? Because I knew, like I said, for a time period that this was not the place for me, or maybe how it was before had transformed and it was no longer a healthy place for me to be. Okay. So depression. So depression, I know for me was very challenging because I mentioned in the previous video that when this toxic stuff was happening in my job, simultaneously I was going through the worst periods of my life with my son in terms of him going through bullying at his previous school, right? And trying to support him and support our family. It was devastating. And I'll talk more about that in another video in terms of suing the school and on the whole thing. Okay. So I was already going through a very difficult time in my life. And the timing of the toxic job stuff could not have been worse. Okay. And so I was really already kind of in a compromised state. And then this happened in terms of dealing with this ongoing psychological harm. And that was very hard for me. It was very depressing. It was very hard for me to get up every day. I dreaded going to work. I would go to work and just be miserable, just thinking about it the whole time. My husband even had to like encourage me to get out of bed. Like it took me a lot to even get out of bed, and just having that feeling that what was I doing here? Right. This is not what I worked so hard for. Right. So if you have gone through any type of anything to get a job, right, you get to a certain point where you're like, this is not what I work for. Okay. So I had gone through so much to become a psychologist, and to become a psychologist and to receive the type of negative treatment that I received at that job was very depressing, and it was very disillusioning. Right. So I felt like, is this the payoff of all that I went through to become a psychologist? It's not worth it. And that contributes to a sense of profound sadness. And I even started questioning, did I want to become or did I want to stay a psychologist? And that's depressing, to think that you have devoted so much of your time, energy, and money to get at a certain point and you're being treated in a certain way. So again, it was very, very sad for me. It was very difficult for me to, like I said, get out of bed. And it was very challenging because I'm a mother. So I have to be very cautious of, being supportive of my children. And I didn't want my children to know that I was hurting too. But guess what? They did. They knew. Okay. Now, part of it that they knew in relation to what I just talked about in terms of that bullying situation for my son, but they also knew that I was being terrorized at my job. They already knew, they could tell in terms of the impact it had on me. And Dr. Nadia Lopez talks about, being mindful that when you're in a toxic job, that you're not the only one that's being harmed. Your family, your loved ones are being harmed too, because they're seeing you being harmed, and that hurts them. Okay, so thinking about, the impact goes not only for you but multiple people. So the sadness, was there for, quite a long time. And, going to therapy, thank God for therapy. Therapists have therapists. Okay, so I just want to say to anyone, if you're in a toxic job, you're experiencing any type of depression, please think about seeking mental health support. And I will put information about how to seek mental health support, particularly from a Black therapist. I will put that in the description section as well. So again, the depression, is very normal, in terms of having this experience. And I also want to mention, something that I experienced and something I've heard other Black women talk about too. My clients have talked about, and very interestingly, even the woman that I booked yesterday for the coaching program, the Black Women Healing from Toxic Jobs program, she mentioned the same thing. Sometimes when you're in a toxic job, it can trigger your previous traumas. Okay. So for me, it triggered the trauma I was going through in real time, but it also triggered my other traumas. Right. So I talked about, previously about being a survivor, in childhood, about childhood trauma. It was triggering that as well. So that became very overwhelming in the sense that, being in a work environment where you felt a loss of power and control, and you felt like you really didn't have a voice, and it felt very abusive. Okay. So again, all of that can really contribute to feelings of depression. So again, my takeaway for this is to recognize that you can survive a toxic job. Know that you need to pause, heal, right? And healing is a journey. And that if you need to seek additional support, if you need to go to therapy, please do so, right? Please get the support you need, because sometimes when we're in these environments, it feels like a tunnel vision. That's kind of what depression does. It makes things like a tunnel vision that you can't really see a way out. And I remember very vividly, when I was in the middle of all of this, and I was asleep, and I actually saw myself going towards this black hole, right? And the black hole to me symbolized depression, right? And I felt myself going there, and I felt like I had no control in terms of going there. I felt like it was just sucking me in. And all of a sudden, I heard my mother's voice call my name, and it got me out. Okay. So again, my hope for you is that if you are experiencing any type of depression in relation to a toxic job, please seek support. Please get that therapy, right? And again, reminding all of us that healing is possible. If you are interested in the job coaching program that I have for Black women to help you also heal from being in a toxic job, so that all that stuff, all that mess from that previous job doesn't carry over to your next opportunity, please contact me. I will put information about the job coaching program in terms of scheduling a free 15-minute consultation in the description section. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do so, and also turn on notifications. I want to say again, thank you to Black women for reaching out to me and saying thank you for doing this work. Thank you for having these conversations. Thank you for being transparent about your own healing journey. And I will continue to have these conversations. By subscribing, you are encouraging me to continue, right, in this work. So again, I'm going to sign off. These are very short videos I'm doing today. It wasn't planned, but I just decided to do this for the last day of the year. So I'm going to sign off shortly. I'm going to regroup. As I mentioned before, I'm talking about my own trauma. So I need to heal as I'm talking about it too, right? So I'm talking about it. I'm going to take a moment to just to take some deep breaths, drink some water, just think positive thoughts as I come back and talk about the last stage of grief. So please tune in as I go over the last stage of grief in relation to a toxic job, and I will see you soon. Take care.